Look, have you ever noticed how the people who talk the most about wanting to change never actually change? They download the motivation apps. They follow the productivity gurus. They write in their journals every morning. They make the vision boards. They buy the books. They watch the videos, maybe even this one. And yet, 6 months later, a year later, nothing has changed, not because they're lazy, not because they're stupid, not because they don't have access to the information, but because of something much deeper. Something Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists who ever lived, spent his entire career trying to warn us about. He said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Think about it. The problem was never motivation. The problem was never discipline. The problem was never your environment, your circumstances, or your past. The problem is that you are lying to yourself. And you've been doing it for so long, it doesn't even feel like lying anymore. It feels like truth. This is what makes Carl Jung's psychology so uncomfortable and so powerful, because Jung didn't believe in the comfortable version of self-improvement. He didn't believe that if you just wake up earlier or drink more water or repeat affirmations in the mirror, something will magically shift inside you. No, Jung believed that real change, the kind that actually lasts, requires something most people are not willing to do. It requires you to look at the parts of yourself you've been running from your entire life. I want to tell you something I discovered about motivation that changed everything for me. I used to believe I had a motivation problem. I had big dreams, real dreams. But every time I tried to pursue them, something would stop me, some invisible force. I would start strong, feel the excitement, make plans, and then slowly, quietly, I would stop. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it wasn't the right time. I told myself that maybe I wasn't meant for this, that maybe I was being realistic. But the truth, the real truth I was running from, was something else entirely. I wasn't tired. I was afraid of trying and failing, afraid that if I gave it everything and still didn't succeed, I would have to face the possibility that maybe I truly wasn't good enough. And that was a thought I couldn't handle, so instead, I chose never to fully try. That way, I always had an excuse. Well, I never really gave it my best shot. That is not a motivation problem. That is a self-deception problem. And Carl Jung saw this exact pattern in hundreds of his patients. He called it by a different name. He called it the shadow. Let me explain what the shadow actually is, not the superficial definition. The real one, Jung believed that the human mind is like an iceberg. The small part above the water is your conscious self, the version of you that you show to the world. The version of you that goes to work, talks to people, makes plans, sets goals. But underneath is something much larger. Jung called it the unconscious. And within the unconscious lives what he called the shadow. The shadow is not some evil monster living inside you. It's not something supernatural or dark in the way movies portray it. The shadow is simply the collection of every part of yourself that you decided at some point in your life was unacceptable. Think about it. When you were young, you expressed yourself freely. You got angry. You were selfish sometimes. You were scared. You were jealous. You had big, unrealistic dreams that you spoke about openly. And then someone laughed at you, or punished you, or told you that good people don't feel that way, or that you were being ridiculous. And so slowly you pushed those parts of yourself down, deep into the unconscious. You told yourself you didn't feel that way anymore. You told yourself you had changed, but you hadn't changed. Those feelings, those desires, those fears, they didn't disappear. They went underground. And from there, from the darkness of the unconscious, they began to control you in ways you couldn't see. This is the first lie. And it is the most dangerous one. The lie that says, I don't have motivation because something is wrong with my situation, not with me. Jung would call this projection. When the unconscious shadow becomes too uncomfortable to acknowledge, the mind does something incredibly clever, incredibly deceptive. It takes what you can't accept about yourself and places it outside of you. Suddenly it's not your fear of failure that's stopping you. It's your boss, your family, your finances, your city, the algorithm, the economy. And here is what makes this so difficult to detect. Because sometimes those external things are real problems. Sometimes your boss truly is difficult. Sometimes your finances truly are limited. But Jung said, and this is the key insight, even when the external obstacle is real, the way you respond to it is being shaped by your shadow, by the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. So the person who blames their family for not having time to pursue their goals often secretly believes they don't deserve to succeed. They're using their family as a cover story for their own fear. The person who says they would start their business if they just had more money often secretly fears judgment. What will people think if they try and fail publicly? The person who says they're waiting for the right moment, for the right sign, for the right alignment of circumstances, often secretly doesn't believe they are capable of handling the responsibility of success. This is projection. And it keeps you trapped inside a story that feels completely real, but is actually a construction, a defense mechanism, a lie your own mind tells itself to protect you from facing what you're truly afraid of. Now here is where Carl Jung goes even deeper. And this is the part most people are not ready to hear. He said, most of what you call your motivation problem is actually a conflict between who you truly are and who you have convinced yourself you should be. Let me give you a real example. I once knew someone, brilliant person who had a passion for art. Since childhood, the way they talked about painting, about color, about light, you could feel their whole being come alive, but they became an engineer. Because that was the safe choice, the responsible choice, the choice their family approved of, and for years they called themselves unmotivated. They would start new habits, new routines, new systems to force themselves to care about their work. Nothing lasted, nothing stuck. Because the energy they were forcing into engineering was stolen. It belonged to something else. It belonged to the unlived life, to use Jung's exact phrase, the life they had never allowed themselves to live. Jung said, "The unlived life is the greatest burden a person can carry." Think about it. Every morning you wake up and drag yourself to do something your soul is not interested in. You are not fighting laziness. You are fighting your own nature. And nature always wins. Eventually, the second lie is more subtle and perhaps more painful. Not ready yet. This is one of the most beautifully crafted lies the human mind has ever invented, because it sounds wise. It sounds responsible. It sounds like you're being careful, like you're planning, like you're being strategic, but most of the time, it is fear wearing the costume of preparation. Jung had a concept called the persona, the mask we show to the world. And one of the things the persona does, one of its primary functions, is to protect us from vulnerability. When you say, "I'm not ready yet," what you are often really saying is, "I am not ready to be seen failing. I am not ready to be judged. I am not ready to face the possibility that I will try and it will not work." And so you learn. You take another course. You read another book. You make another plan. You watch another video. You consume and consume and consume, and you call it preparation. But there is a moment, and you know this moment, you felt it when you are no longer preparing, when you are hiding. The preparation becomes a ritual, a daily ritual of feeling productive without actually being productive, of feeling like you're moving forward without actually taking a step. This is the shadow at work. The part of you that is terrified of real exposure, of putting something true out into the world and having it be rejected, so it disguises that terror as prudence. The question Jung would ask you is not, what are you still missing? The question is, what are you protecting yourself from? Because that answer, that is where your real work begins. Now I want to talk about something Jung called the self. And I want to be careful here, because this is where his psychology becomes almost spiritual in its depth. Jung believed that within every human being there is a core, a true self, not the personality you developed to survive your childhood, not the version of yourself you created to gain approval from others, not the mask you wear at work or in relationships, the actual you. He believed that the human psyche has a natural drive, what he called individuation, to move toward wholeness, to integrate the shadow, to become as fully as possible who you truly are. And he believed, and this is important, that when you are not moving in the direction of your true self, you will feel it. Not always in obvious ways, but you will feel it in a persistent, unexplained tiredness, in the sense that life is happening to you rather than through you, in the feeling of going through the motions, in the restlessness that no amount of distraction can fully quiet. What most people call burnout is often this. It is the cost of maintaining a false self over a long period of time. The energy required to be someone you are not, the exhaustion of constant performance, and what most people call depression is sometimes this. Not always, but sometimes. It is the psyche's way of stopping you, of forcing you to slow down long enough to ask the question you have been avoiding. Is this actually my life? Or is this a life I fell into because I was too afraid to choose differently? The third lie is the one that has destroyed more potential than perhaps anything else. Just don't have what it takes. This one is interesting, because unlike the other lies, this one often comes dressed as humility, as self-awareness, as being realistic. Not like those successful people. I don't have their drive. I don't have their talent. I don't have their circumstances. Jung would tell you something that might genuinely shock you. He would say, the very things you admire most in others, the qualities that make you look at them and feel that surge of inspiration mixed with that quiet ache of inadequacy, those qualities are already inside you, dormant, hidden, buried in the shadow. This is a phenomenon Jung described at length. He noticed that the traits we most admire or envy in others are usually the traits we have suppressed in ourselves. When you look at someone who is courageous and feel deeply inspired, not just intellectually, but in your body, that resonance you feel is recognition. You are recognizing a part of yourself you have buried. When you look at someone who is creative, who builds things, who expresses themselves freely, who takes risks, and you feel that mixture of admiration and longing, that is not evidence that you lack those qualities. That is evidence that you have them. And that somewhere along the way, you decided they were not safe to express. The confident person who makes you feel inspired. You have suppressed your own confidence because at some point, confidence was not rewarded. Maybe it was punished. The creative person who makes you feel that ache of possibility. You have suppressed your own creativity because at some point, someone told you it was impractical. A waste of time. Think about it. The qualities we project onto others as being beyond us are the exact qualities the shadow is holding for us, waiting for us to be brave enough to claim them. But here is where it gets complicated. And this is the part most people skip over. Carl Jung did not believe that confronting the shadow is a pleasant experience. He said it clearly. He said the shadow confrontation is one of the most disturbing and difficult things a person can do, because it requires you to admit things about yourself that your entire identity has been built around denying. It requires you to admit that the anger you always blamed on others was yours, that the fear of failure you always explained away as being careful was yours, that the laziness you always justified with "I was just tired" was a choice, that the time you said "I'll do it tomorrow" for the 400th time, you knew somewhere inside you that tomorrow was not the real answer. This is painful, not in a small way, in a real way, the kind of pain that has texture and weight. But Jung believed, and this is the central pillar of his entire life's work, that this pain is not optional. It is not something you can outsmart or shortcut or skip. The shadow always finds a way to the surface. If you don't face it consciously, through self-examination, through honesty, through what Jung called the descent into the unconscious, it will come up in other ways. In your relationships, where you will find yourself endlessly attracting the same problems with different people. In your patterns, where you will find yourself making the same mistake in different forms, over and over again. In your body, where unexpressed truth sometimes speaks through illness, through chronic tension, through a heaviness that has no clear medical explanation. Jung said it in one of his most famous lines. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Read that again. Until you make the unconscious conscious. Until you stop running from the parts of yourself you have buried, those parts will run your life for you. And you will think it's just bad luck. You will think it's just how things are for you. You will think it's the economy or your family or the timing or the algorithm. But it isn't. It is you. The unseen you. The you that you never agreed to look at. I want to spend a moment on something practical. Because everything I have said so far might sound philosophical. And it is. But Jung's psychology is not only philosophy. It has very real, very practical implications for how you live your daily life. Here is a practice that Jung himself used, and that is still used in depth psychology today. It is called shadow integration. And it starts with something deceptively simple. Pay attention to the people who make you react strongly, not the people you dislike in a casual way. The people who make something inside you contract, who make you feel a flash of irritation or contempt or deep unease that seems out of proportion to what they actually did. That reaction is information. Jung believed that the qualities that trigger the strongest negative reactions in us are almost always qualities we have in ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge. The person who infuriates you with their arrogance. Ask yourself, where in your life are you arrogant and how long have you been pretending otherwise? The person who disgusts you with their laziness. Ask yourself, where in your life are you choosing comfort over growth and calling it something else? The person who makes you angry with their dishonesty. Ask yourself, where in your life are you being dishonest with others or, more importantly, with yourself? This is not about blame. This is about illumination. Because every time you point at someone else's quality with that particular charge of emotion, you're being handed a mirror. The shadow lives in the mirror you refuse to look into. The fourth lie is the one that masquerades most convincingly as wisdom. I'm doing my best. Think about it. Are you not in general, not in theory, in the specific area where you are not growing, in the specific area where you have been telling yourself the same story for months or years? Are you actually doing your best? Or are you doing enough to feel okay about yourself? Enough to maintain the story that you're trying? Enough to avoid the discomfort of full commitment? There is a profound difference between these two things. And Jung would say that most people live their entire lives in the second category while sincerely believing they are in the first, because the mind is extraordinarily clever at making half-effort feel like full effort, at making protection feel like progress, at making avoidance feel like wisdom. You have not been reading books for 3 years because you love reading. You have been reading books because reading feels like growth without the risk of real growth. You have not been planning your business for 18 months because you are being thorough. You have been planning because planning feels like action without the vulnerability of real action. You have not been getting ready because you actually need more time. You have been getting ready because readiness is a horizon. It always stays just out of reach. And as long as you're chasing it, you never have to face the moment of real commitment. That is not your best. Your best is messy. Your best is uncertain. Your best is terrified and still moving. Your best requires you to let go of the safety net of "I wasn't really trying." Now, after everything I've told you, the question is not, "Okay, I understand I lie to myself, so what do I do now?" The question is different. The question is, are you willing to stop being comfortable? Because comfort is the ally of the shadow. Every time you choose comfort over truth, the shadow grows stronger. Every time you choose the familiar story over the honest one, the walls get a little higher. Jung said that the reason most people don't change, even when they consciously want to, is not lack of motivation. No, it is that change requires you to die a little. The version of you that has these comfortable stories, the version that always has an excuse, that always has a reason, that always has a tomorrow, that version of you has to end. And that feels like death. Psychologically, even when it is not physical, the ego experiences the death of its defenses as a profound threat. It resists with everything it has. This is why you can read about motivation for years and still not change. This is why you can understand intellectually what you need to do and still not do it. This is why the gap between knowing and doing is not a gap of information. It is a gap of courage, not the dramatic, cinematic courage of running into burning buildings. The quiet, grinding, daily courage of choosing honesty when comfort is available. The courage of saying, "I am afraid, and I am going to do it anyway." The courage of admitting, "This story I have been telling myself is not true. It is a defense. And I am choosing to put it down." There is a concept in Jungian psychology called the transcendent function, and I want to explain it simply because it contains something important. Jung believed that when the conscious mind and the unconscious, when the person you present to the world and the person you truly are come into genuine dialogue with each other, something new can emerge, not a compromise between the two. Something new, something that transcends both. This is what individuation actually is. It is not becoming the best version of the persona, the mask. It is not becoming the unfiltered expression of the shadow either. It is the emergence of a third thing. A more whole, more integrated, more authentically you version of yourself. And what Jung noticed is that when people begin this process, when they begin genuinely engaging with the parts of themselves they have been running from, their relationship with motivation changes completely. Not because motivation becomes easier, but because it becomes real. When you are living in alignment with who you actually are, when the energy you put into your life is going towards something that your soul actually recognizes as its own, the question of motivation becomes almost irrelevant. You don't ask yourself how to motivate yourself to do something you genuinely love. You don't need a system or a routine or an accountability partner to make you do the thing you were born to do. The pull is internal. The drive comes from alignment, not from willpower. This is why the most consistent, most productive, most seemingly motivated people you will ever meet are almost never the ones who are disciplined in the conventional sense. They are the ones who have found the thing that is genuinely theirs. The work that their shadow no longer needs to protect them from, because they are finally doing what they were meant to do. Let me talk about relationships for a moment. Because the shadow does not only show up in our personal ambitions, it shows up powerfully, perhaps most powerfully, in our relationships with other people. Jung had a term, psychological projection. When we cannot face something inside ourselves, we unconsciously transfer it onto someone else. We experience our own shadow as coming from outside us. The person who cannot admit their own need for control will experience their partner as controlling. The person who cannot admit their own emotional neediness will experience their friends as clingy and exhausting. The person who cannot admit their own dishonesty, the ways they deceive themselves, the ways they are not fully truthful about their own motivations, will find themselves in relationships where they feel constantly lied to. This is not coincidence. This is not bad luck. This is projection. This is the shadow finding its mirror in the external world because the internal world refuses to look. And the tragedy is that these patterns repeat. Not because you keep choosing the wrong people, but because the pattern you are running from is inside you. And until you turn around and face it, it will keep appearing in front of you wearing different faces. Every difficult relationship you have ever had carries information about your shadow. Every pattern that keeps repeating, every type of person you keep being drawn to and then hurt by is a message from your unconscious. And that message is always some version of the same thing. Look here. Stop looking out there. Look here. Want to say something that might sound harsh, but I need you to hear it. The fact that you are watching this video, the fact that you are here, engaging with these ideas, that is not nothing. Most people will spend their entire lives successfully avoiding this conversation. They will stay busy enough that the quiet never gets loud enough to ask the hard questions. They will scroll and consume and distract themselves with everything available to modern life, and they will call it living. The fact that something in you is drawn to this, drawn to psychology, to self-understanding, to the question of why you do what you do, that is not a small thing. But I also need to be honest with you about something. Understanding this psychology will not automatically change your life. Reading about the shadow does not integrate the shadow. Knowing that you are in self-deception does not automatically end the self-deception. The integration of the shadow is work. Real work. The kind of work that happens in the private moments, when no one is watching, when there is no external reward, when the only reason to be honest with yourself is because you have decided that you would rather live in truth than in comfort. It is the work of sitting alone and asking yourself, what am I actually afraid of? Not what I tell people I'm afraid of, not the socially acceptable version of my fear. What is the actual thing? It is the work of watching your reactions, especially the strong ones, and asking, what does this reaction say about me? Not about them. About me. It is the work of looking at every pattern that keeps repeating in your life and asking, what am I choosing? What story am I telling that keeps producing this result? This is not comfortable work. It is not the kind of work that produces visible results in a week or gets external validation. It is slow and often disorienting, but it is the only work that actually matters. The only work that produces the kind of change that lasts. Carl Jung lived to the age of 85. He worked until the end of his life. And in his final autobiography, a book called Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote something that I have never been able to forget. He said that the most important question a person can ask themselves, more important than what do I want to achieve, or how do I become successful, or how do I become happy, is this: what myth am I living? What story am I telling myself about who I am, about what I deserve, about what is possible for me, about what stands between me and the life I actually want to live? Because almost always, when you trace the story back far enough, when you follow the thread of why am I the way I am, all the way back, you will find a moment. A childhood moment, or a series of moments, where you made a decision about yourself and about the world. A moment where you decided that expressing yourself fully was dangerous. A moment where you decided that you couldn't trust your own judgment. A moment where you decided that wanting more was selfish, or unrealistic, or arrogant. A moment where you decided that people like you don't succeed at things like this. And you made that decision at age 6, or age 11, or age 15, when you had very limited information, when you were very small, when you were in pain and doing the best you could to protect yourself. But that decision, that tiny, forgotten decision made by a child in a moment of vulnerability, is now running your life as an adult. And you are calling it your personality. You are calling it who I am. You are calling it your limitations. You are calling it reality. This is the deepest lie of all. Not a conscious lie, not a malicious lie, but a lie nonetheless. And the beginning of freedom is the moment you recognize it as one. So, what now? Not how do you get motivated? That was never the right question. The right question is, what are you lying to yourself about, not in a general sense? Specifically, in your actual life, in the area where you have been telling yourself the same story for the longest time. What is the story? And what is the truth underneath it? Because motivation, real, sustainable, internally generated motivation, does not come from the apps or the morning routines or the accountability partners or the vision boards. It comes from alignment, from doing the thing that is actually yours to do. From living in enough honesty with yourself that the energy doesn't have to fight against its own current. Jung spent his life saying this in 1,000 different ways. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally unmotivated. You are not someone who cannot change. You are a person who is carrying a version of themselves that no longer fits. And the work is not to force the old version to perform better. The work is to let the old version go, to look at the stories, to examine the fears, to stop calling the shadow a monster and start calling it what it actually is. The parts of yourself that have been waiting, patiently, sometimes painfully, for you to finally come home. Because the strongest position in life is not having unlimited motivation. It is knowing who you are clearly enough that no story, not the comfortable one, not the protective one, not the one you've been telling for 20 years, can stand between you and that truth. That is what Carl Jung was pointing toward. And it begins the moment you decide to stop lying.